everybody, good morning. This is Jean here, Jean Truelove from Truelove Quilts for You, and hanging behind me is my bandana quilt that I have been making. I finished it. The little video to come here is showing you how I've done it a million times, how I've chosen my binding fabric and how I've put my binding on. I've curved the corners, as you know. Somebody did say, are you gonna have square corners? Nope, I'm not. I'm not having square corners. I'm not doing a mitered binding. I like my curved corners. I free motion quilted. I finished that. You see my videos in my playlist on how I did this. I finished it both on my free motion quilting on my Juki and my new baby lock machine. Figured it out. I just did a meandering stitch all over. Again, this is just showing how I chose my binding. Now, I was telling you, like, I love to use striped fabric. I didn't use nice striped fabric. I used a gingham, and I explained to you how you have to be careful if you're using a gingham. Now, this is, as I keep saying, this is not an heirloom quality quilt. The quilt, the backing, the batting is all 100% cotton. The gingham is a cotton poly mix. I'm not bothered with that. It'll wash up fine. It's great. It'll be a picnic quilt. Back in the car, it's lovely because just a small portion of the free motion quilting got really messed up. But I'm not taking it apart. It's fine. Yeah, so there's my lovely quilt that I've made. I've enjoyed making this very much. This is the second one I've made. I have another one down here, and I just think if you need an inexpensive quilt, this is 12 bandanas, and in this country, 99 cents a piece. So the quilt top didn't even cost $12. And then if I hadn't mastered free motion quilting, I could have just straight stitched it right across in a grid. So it's a nice, simple quilt to make. So again, see my playlist, my bandana quilt, how I made this one and my other one. And this one is showing you how I put my binding on. So you've seen me do that a million times, but for those who are new here, this is how I do it. I stitch my binding to the back of my quilt and then turn it to the front and stitch it down. So I do hope you enjoy this video, folks, and how I finished up my bandana quilt. Thanks for watching. Love for the tree loves. Bye-bye. So you've seen me do this plenty of times. I have finished free motion quilting my bandana quilt, and all I'm going to do now is trim off the batting and the backing for me to put the binding on. I've stitched the quilt top to the back, stitched it all the way along, about 1/8 of an inch, and a lot of people use a ruler to do this. I'm pretty good with just my rotary cutter. I'm just going to trim that off about 1/4 inch away, and I'll just do that all the way around my quilt sandwich here. What I've done is, as you know, I'm not going to have square corners. I'm going to have round corners. So what I've done is I put my two corners together, and then I'm going to grab, do this one. That's a bit bigger. Yeah, it's okay though. I can see what I'm doing. Just take a pen. Usually I eyeball this, but a lot of people do. You know, if you're not careful eyeballing, the two corners are together, as you can see there. And I'm just going to make that nice little curve there. Yeah, and I'll save that because then I'm going to go to my other side and put the two together like so. Now, somebody asked about, you know, squaring up your quilts. I don't know what that means, because after I make my quilt and after I sort of quilt it, it's pretty square. or it's rectangular, however it should be. I don't really have a hard time with my quilts not being square. So I don't quite understand what that means. Yeah, it's good. I like a rounded corner on all my quilts. As you know, a lot of people don't. A lot of people have a nice square corner, but I like my corners round. That's just how I do things. So as you know, I love to use a striped fabric for my bindings. I think I've said it before. It just brightens up and makes a happy ending to a quilt. Here is my other bandana quilt that I had made in the sort of the Ready Coral and the cream, and there is my striped binding. I used a gray and white striped binding for that. You can see I curved the corners on that quilt too. So that's how this is going to turn out. I love my striped binding. So immediately I went to my stripes and I pulled this pink out. I'm looking at this and it's sort of not quite auditioning that. It's sort of not quite the right shade of pink, although I like it. And again, it looks like candy cane. It's just so happy, but it's not quite speaking to me. So then I went and I pulled out a pink dot, which I quite like actually. I think that's very pretty. Again, that's the slightly more peachy, so I don't love that. Then I thought, well, since it has black and white in it, why don't I do, instead of a black and white stripe, why don't I go for the black and white gingham? And I really like that black and white gingham. Now, when you're working with gingham, you have to make sure that you cut your strips, every single one, perfectly in line with how you want your design. So as you can see, if you do it wrong, you're just going to get a black, and if you can see that, you're just going to get a black and gray. Whereas if you want the black, white, and gray, it makes a big difference. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to figure out I'm going to cut them at 2 1/4 inches wide. How the design that I want once I turn it, once I stitch it to the back and turn it to the front. The actual design of gingham is where you can make a nice straight line. So I'm cutting this a little bit bigger than 2 1/4, not quite 2 1/2, but because I want to figure out when I turn it over and then when I go to stitch it, just figure out that this is what's going to show, which that is the binding I want. I want more white. Do you see that? As if I did it over this way, I would have more black and white. Hopefully you can understand it. It's just a little thing. It's just a silly little thing. But when I'm stitching this, I'm doing this the length of the fabric here, and as you can see, I had previously cut my gingham along this edge there, this black edge. So I am just following the gingham pattern between this black and this sort of white strip. The 4 of them will be good. Now usually I would sew my quilt bindings together like so and so, like that. Put on the diagonal. But I don't want to mess up that pattern. You see it can get messed up. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stitch along here and press that seam open. I've started sewing my binding on, but I wanted to show you when I was working with this gingham, when I was making my binding, I made sure, if you can see here, that all of the plaid, all of the gingham was going the exact same way on in the entire strip. So on this side, as you can see, I have the white at the top, and then on this side there's the black on the top. So what I'm doing is I'm sewing to the wrong side of my quilt. I'm sewing the black side so that when I turn my binding over to the front, you're going to get a nice, I figure you're going to get a nice black edge with a sort of a white inside there. Hopefully you can see that. It's just a little thing with gingham that you have to make sure, because your eye will actually see a variation working with plaids or stripes or gingham. Your eye would see if that wasn't made really well. Now somebody might say, well, it might not be on the straight grain of the fabric. Well, for the binding, I'm okay with it. I'm all right with it, because from the manufacturers, this has turned out really well. I think it's right on the straight grain of fabric, or the lengthwise grain actually, and it's been cut well, and then it's been stitched on well. So I'm just going to continue stitching. This is, as I was saying in the beginning, I usually do 2 1/4. This is just slightly wider than 2 1/4 because of the pattern of the gingham, but I'm okay with that. So I'm stitching it on at 1/4 of an inch. And again, I have stay stitched my my quilt top together so that when I turn it over, all of that raw edge, as you do with binding, will be all enclosed like such. A tiny little tuck in, it's okay, but the big thing is when I'm easing around a corner is to relax my fabric. Do not pull anything. Do not pull the fabric towards me. Just ease it around so that when I turn it over to the back, to the front side to stitch it, it will lay nice and flat and it won't cup up. Down. Let me just come along here. I'll show you. Hopefully that won't cup up. I'll come on my straightaway. And let me just see. Yeah, you see how that turns over beautifully like that? Turns right over. Really nice. When I go to stitch that, just like that. Real nice. And usually I have a special way to do a diagonal binding. Just cut that off there. Which is I would open up this piece here and turn it this way, and then I would bring up this piece and then I would stitch it and stitch it on the diagonal. But because I'm just wanting to keep my plaid or my gingham perfectly straight, what I am going to do is I'm just going to smooth out the top one like so, and then I'm going to smooth up the bottom one like so, and I'm just going to cut the top so I have, when I go to sew these together, it's about 1/2 inch seam. I'm just going to do a straight stitch across. Now I like to usually do a diagonal stitch, but I'm going to take that off like that, and I'm going to put the right sides together just like you would right sides together. This is actually easier than messing about with a diagonal, and I cut it so it's about 1/2 inch. You should pin it or clip it, I'm doing the right sides together. So hopefully my pattern, my plaid sort of matches up. If it doesn't, then for just this 1/2 inch, it'll be fine. But again, that's right sides together, like so. Pull it, and there you go. I'm going to finger press this open. And then that whole bit, there's my seam. Oops, a little fuzzy there. There's my seam. And then when I turn it around, you won't even see that straight across seam. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my quilt around. I'm going to turn it to the right side, the pretty side, and then I'm going to pull out. As anybody have seen me doing this, I never pull towards me. The binding is always smoothed outwards. As you can see, around that curve, that just lays beautifully flat. So when I go to stitch that at 1/4 inch, it's just beautifully flat right there. A little bit more than 1/4 inch. But again, hopefully you can see that my plaid or my gingham, there's white on the inside and then black on the outside.